What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
I had 27 confirmed RSVPs, handwritten in my old planner, each one underlined with a red marker like a promise signed in blood. My sister Claire's message even had 3 heart emojis, and I wouldn't miss it for the world. The night before, Dave, my ex-husband of 10 years who still occasionally brings me peppermint tea when I have the flu, like that somehow balances out leaving me for a woman he met at a fantasy football party, offered to help with setup and said he'd bring balloons. The big shiny kind with helium that float like they've got dreams of their own. My best friend since kindergarten, Tina, texted at 6 p.m. the night before. Alarm set, babe. Can't wait to see you shine. My mom had died when I was 27, and ever since, I'd clung to what little family I had like it was a sweater 2 sizes too small. I wore it anyway, because it reminded me of warmth. I stood outside my store at 9:47 that morning, holding a pair of golden scissors I bought online from some party supply company that had the audacity to call them ceremonial. The store was small, nothing grand, but it was mine. Every piece of shelving sanded by hand, the signage painted in my cramped apartment with the kind of obsessive precision that only comes from knowing you have no second chance if you mess it up. I called it Jenna's Nest, a little boutique that sold candles, curated home goods, handmade things from local women who, like me, had spent their lives putting their own dreams dead last. I wanted it to smell like home when people walked in, to feel like something warm was waiting for them, because God knows most of us are out here freezing, just hoping someone remembers our birthday. By 10 o'clock, my neighbor's teenage son, Miles, who runs the espresso bar next door and calls me Miss J, asked if he should start filming. I said, give it a few more minutes, someone's bound to show up. But the street stayed quiet. There were no cars pulling in, no doors opening, no familiar voices calling my name or teasing me for getting so emotional over some damn candles. Just a gentle wind that made the red ribbon flutter like it was trying to escape. At 10:06, I exhaled, nodded to Miles, and cut the ribbon in one swift, definitive motion. The scissors didn't glide like in the movies, they snagged halfway through, and I had to tug a little, which felt right in a twisted way. Nothing in my life had ever come easy, so why would this be the exception? As Miles lowered the phone, I turned toward the lens and said something I hadn't planned. I looked dead on into that camera and said, to my supporters, you know who you are. No forced smile, no bitterness in my voice, just a calm truth that landed like a brick. Then I walked inside and opened the doors for the first time. I rang up my first customer, some lady named Roberta who wandered in by accident looking for the pet groomer that used to rent the space, and gave her a 10% discount just for being the first soul to cross my threshold. Miles stayed and helped me rearrange the display when one of the candle stacks fell over. I kept checking my phone. No missed calls. No apologies. No running late. Just silence, the kind that doesn't come from forgetfulness, it comes from choice. An hour later, my phone lit up with a call from Grandma Evelyn. I stared at it for a beat, then answered, expecting congratulations or maybe some heartfelt blessing. Instead, she was breathless and accusatory. Why didn't you tell us you were postponing? Claire said you canceled the event. What's going on, Jenna? I froze. Postponed? I asked, dumbfounded. No, I opened at 10, just like I told everyone. A pause followed, thick and disorienting. Then she said, Claire said she got a text from you. Thought something came up. I knew then I hadn't been stood up. I'd been erased. My grandmother sounded genuinely confused, maybe even embarrassed. I tried to explain, but her voice turned tight formal, like she'd already chosen not to believe me. I hope everything's okay, she said, before hanging up without the usual love you, sweetie. I stood there, still holding the phone, my fingers numb not from cold, but from something worse. That creeping, stomach-twisting feeling that the people you trust most might not just forget about you, they might actually want to. I walked into the back room and shut the door. Sat on the stool by the stock shelf where I kept the wicks and oils. My head was spinning with timelines, texts, receipts. I scrolled through my messages again. There was no cancellation, no reschedule. Claire's last text was a gif of a champagne glass clinking. Tina's was a heart. Dave's was a thumbs up. They weren't confused. They weren't misinformed. They had chosen not to come. And then it hit me. This wasn't just about one Saturday morning or a ribbon. This was about every time I'd asked for help moving and ended up doing it alone. Every birthday dinner they forgot until I posted a picture. Every time they said they were too busy to come to the market when I had a booth at the fair. Every micro-abandonment, every polite dismissal, every backhanded compliment disguised as support. They didn't believe in me. They didn't want me to win. Or worse, they didn't think I could win. I opened Instagram, uploaded the video Miles had taken, and added the caption, "Cut the ribbon this morning." To my supporters, you know who you are. No tags. No drama. Just truth. By the time I checked again 30 minutes later, the video had been shared 50 times, mostly by strangers, other small business owners, and a couple of locals I barely knew. But no Claire. No Tina. No Dave. That night, as I turned off the lights in the shop and locked the door, I stood on the sidewalk and let the silence settle. It wasn't just about who didn't show up, it was about what that said. And I knew then, standing under that flickering streetlight with the smell of lavender wax still on my hands, that something in me had shifted. Whatever came next wouldn't be for their approval or their applause. Because you can forgive someone for forgetting your birthday. But forgetting your beginning? That's a whole other kind of crime. The thing about betrayal is that it never arrives looking like a villain in a movie. It comes dressed in casual clothes, sipping coffee, texting you little hearts, and saying they're proud of you while quietly betting you'll fail behind your back. That Sunday morning, the day after my so-called grand opening, I sat on the floor of my store with my back against the storage closet door, half-eaten donut on the counter, my phone in one hand and my pride in the other. And I started scrolling through every message from the past week like a woman digging through ashes looking for the ember that started the fire. I wasn't looking for drama, I wanted proof, patterns, something solid I could point to and say, here's where it all started unraveling. And what I found was worse than a single moment of sabotage. It was a string of tiny decisions, little omissions, half-truths, and polite excuses that together formed a quiet, deliberate erasure. Claire's last message before the event was at 9:42 the night before. "Can't wait to see the store. You did it, baby sis." There were sparkles, clapping hands, and a little champagne glass. I had read that message a dozen times before going to sleep with a dumb smile on my face, feeling like, finally, my big sister saw me as something other than the family mess. But now, with my heart still bruised from yesterday's silence, I clicked on her social media account and stared at what she'd posted just hours after my ribbon cutting. The image was sharp and smug, a perfectly set table with custom napkins, endless mimosas, and a caption that read, "Brunch with my favorites. Grateful for Sundays like these." There were tags 5 women, all from town, including Tina, who had promised me just the night before that she'd be there with bells on. Claire had even geotagged it at her own house, meaning she wasn't out of town or sick or stuck in traffic. She was having French toast and bottomless mimosas with my best friend of 30 years while I was slicing ribbon with scissors that barely cut. I felt something twist in my stomach, an ache that was less about shock and more about recognition, because the truth is, I'd felt this before, in smaller ways, 100 times over the years. The time I got laid off from my accounting job and Claire told me to take it as a sign to finally grow up. Or when I told Tina about my candle business idea 2 years ago and she laughed and said, "You've always been more creative than practical, Jen." There were signs, red flags waving so wildly I should have tripped over them, but I called it love, called it friendship, called it family, because what else do you call the people who've known you longest, even when knowing you seems to mean never believing in you? Out of morbid curiosity, I clicked Tina's page and found more of the same, photos of the brunch, filtered to perfection, and a comment she'd left under Claire's post that stopped me cold. So glad I came. Needed this reset. Some things just aren't worth showing up for anymore. It didn't have my name on it, but it may as well have. I stared at the screen, throat tight, the corners of my vision going fuzzy with heat. I wasn't just ignored, I was the joke. The thing they all quietly agreed was ridiculous, a failed attempt waiting to be proven right by time. I closed the app, threw my phone across the counter, and sat there in the stillness of my store, surrounded by candles that smelled like warmth and comfort, ironic now in a space so full of betrayal. I wasn't angry in the explosive way that sends plates flying or voices shouting. I was angry in that slow-burning, cold kind of way, where the silence screams louder than any tantrum. I stood up, walked to the door, and flipped the sign to closed, even though technically I should have been open. I couldn't smile at strangers while this poison was still in my throat. Later that night, after 2 glasses of boxed red wine and half a season of some show I wasn't even watching, I decided to go back through my messages with Dave, not because I missed him, but because I needed to understand the timeline. His last text had said, "Hope the launch goes great. Something came up this morning. Sorry I can't be there. Proud of you." I remember reading that at 10:15, just after cutting the ribbon, thinking it was a nice gesture. But something about it now felt off, too vague, too rehearsed. I typed back, "What exactly came up yesterday?" and hit send before I could second-guess it. He replied a few minutes later, "Just life stuff. Nothing important." When I pressed him, he added, "Thought Claire said you postponed?" And that, right there, was the crack that split the ground beneath me. Postponed. Again. Same word my grandmother had used. Same excuse. A lie with legs long enough to run circles around me before I even saw it coming. I realized then this wasn't just people being flaky or busy or indifferent. This was coordinated, or at least orchestrated enough to look that way. Someone told them I canceled, and nobody thought to double-check, not because they trusted me to communicate clearly, but because they didn't care enough to find out if it was true. I was that easy to disregard. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed replaying conversations from the past year, all the times Claire had brushed off my updates, all the times Tina had changed the subject when I mentioned progress, all the cold smiles, polite nods, the look of patronizing patience in their eyes whenever I talked about this store like it was more than just a phase. They didn't believe in me. And worse, they didn't want to believe in me. Because my success would make their excuses look thin. Because if I made it out of the pit they left me in, it would prove they never tried. At 3 in the morning, I got up, made a cup of chamomile tea I couldn't taste, and opened my laptop. I started writing down names not of enemies, not yet, but of every person who hadn't shown up, every person who had smiled through their teeth and offered empty encouragement, every person who had quietly stepped back, waiting for me to fail so they wouldn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't know what I was going to do with that list yet, but it felt important. Like the start of something. Not revenge, not yet, but the idea of it. And sometimes, that's more dangerous than the act itself. There's a particular kind of clarity that only shows up after your faith in people has been scraped raw, like how a wound, once cleaned and exposed to the air, stings more than when it was still dirty but hidden. That Monday morning, I arrived at the store early, unlocked the door with fingers that still trembled slightly from a night of restless sleep and too many unspoken thoughts, and I sat down behind the counter with my journal open. Not to write poetry or affirmations or any of that power of positive thinking nonsense, but to make a list that, to anyone else, might have looked petty or vindictive or even pathetic. But to me, in that moment, it felt like survival, like claiming a sliver of order in a world that had just revealed how much of it was built on illusions. I started with the obvious names Claire, Tina, Dave, and then, slowly, almost guiltily, I began adding more. My cousin Madison, who had reposted my launch flyer with a "Go Girl" and then ghosted me on the actual day. My neighbor Teresa, who had borrowed my power washer last summer and never returned it, who'd said she couldn't wait to buy at least 5 candles to support me, but whose absence spoke louder than any purchase ever could. Each name came with a memory, not just of absence, but of small betrayals over time, moments when support was performative, when their enthusiasm was really just a placeholder until something better came along. By the time the list reached 15 names, I stopped pretending I was doing it to let it go or process my emotions. I was making a roster. A reference sheet. A blueprint, maybe. Because I had decided something quietly, firmly, without tears this time, that I wasn't going to try to make them love me, support me, or even acknowledge me. I was going to outgrow them, loudly and visibly. That afternoon, I designed a little promotion. Nothing flashy, just a chalkboard sign out front that read, "Bring someone new into Jenna's nest and both of you get 20% off your purchase." It wasn't just about sales, it was a strategy, a way to convert strangers into allies, to build something stronger than the brittle foundation of childhood friendships and family obligation. I made it my mission to treat every customer like they were doing me a favor just by walking through the door, which, in truth, they were. And slowly, the shift began. A woman named Georgia, whose husband had recently passed, came in and spent nearly 40 minutes smelling every candle, asking questions about essential oils and beeswax, telling me stories about her garden and how much her late husband used to love the smell of cedar. She brought her daughter the next day. Then that daughter brought her book club. Then one of them posted a review online that somehow landed on the front page of a local lifestyle blog, and just like that, momentum started rolling, not like a landslide, but like something that had been waiting beneath the surface, just needing a crack to break through. With every new face came a new name I could mentally place on a different list, the list of people who chose me with no history, no obligation, no blood ties. Just curiosity or kindness, or maybe the simple joy of supporting a woman who looked tired but hopeful. I noticed something else, too. The people who truly showed up didn't ask for discounts, didn't offer backhanded advice, didn't say things like, "Well, at least you're trying." They just came. They bought a candle or two, or asked if I ever taught workshops, or if I needed help sourcing locally. One woman even asked if I'd be interested in setting up a pop-up booth at her church's holiday fair. These weren't grand gestures. They were human ones. Meanwhile, my silence toward the people on the first list grew louder. I didn't reply to Tina's vague, "Hey girl, saw your video, hope the store is going well" message, nor did I acknowledge Dave when he sent a YouTube link to a video about how to scale retail businesses, like he hadn't just skipped the most important moment of mine. Claire, of course, remained silent. Not a word since the grandmother phone call, and I didn't expect one. But what I did do, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, was send each person on that original list a gift basket. Small, tasteful, nothing dramatic. A single candle from my store, one of the best sellers, wrapped in brown paper and twine with a handwritten card that read, "Thank you for not showing up. You reminded me who I'm doing this for." That's it. No accusation. No sarcasm. Just truth, served cold. And it worked, not in some movie-style explosion of guilt or apology, but in subtle shifts. Madison messaged me, asking if I'd consider wholesaling candles for her event planning business. I didn't reply. Teresa returned my power washer, left it on the porch without a note. Tina liked 3 of my Instagram posts in a row, then unfollowed me a day later. Claire stayed silent, but I saw she watched all my stories. That was enough. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I wasn't trying to play games. But I had learned, finally, that love isn't owed just because you share a last name or childhood memories or a wedding toast. It's earned through action, through presence, through the decision to show up even when it's inconvenient. And the people who didn't come on the day I opened my first store had made their decision. I didn't need closure. I didn't need apologies. What I needed was what I was building, one customer at a time, one candle at a time, one small moment of real connection in a world full of fake ones. And as I flipped the sign to "closed" that night, standing in the soft golden glow of the warm lights I'd installed myself, the smell of vanilla and oak lingering in the air like a soft kind of triumph, I knew something had shifted inside me for good. I wasn't the girl waiting at the window anymore. I wasn't hoping someone would rescue me from obscurity or validate my choices with their presence. I was building something from ashes, and it didn't matter who believed in the fire, because it was already burning. There is something unshakably insulting about the way people who once overlooked you, dismissed your ideas with polite smiles, quietly rooted for your failure or orchestrated your erasure, can suddenly reappear with a camera in their hands and a grin stretched across their face, pretending as though they've supported you from the beginning, as though their absence and silence were just minor miscommunications instead of the sharp blades they were. It was a week after I sent those carefully packaged candles with their not-so-subtle message, a week of steadily growing sales and unexpected warmth from strangers who owed me nothing. When the front door bell rang and I looked up from behind the counter expecting another first-time customer, only to find my sister Claire standing in the doorway with her professional smile already in place and a young man beside her, fumbling with a DSLR camera bag like he was the intern she'd picked up on the way. She was dressed the way Claire always dressed when she wanted to look effortless, but in control: cream blazer, subtle jewelry, heels that made her just tall enough to look above the crowd without appearing to try. Her makeup was clean, corporate polished, and her expression held that rehearsed warmth that had once passed for sincerity when I was still young enough to crave her approval. She opened her arms, half a gesture, and said, "There she is, our town's newest success story. I've been meaning to stop by." And just like that, with 8 words and a saccharine smile, she attempted to rewrite the past 2 weeks of silence, absence, and cowardice. For a moment, I said nothing, not because I was caught off guard, but because I needed to gather the exact tone I wanted to use, the exact balance between civility and defiance. The young man set up his equipment, glancing nervously at the shelves of candles and handmade wares, probably wondering whether this was going to be some wholesome puff piece or if he'd accidentally wandered into something messier, more real. Claire had started a video series a few months back, something about local entrepreneurs, using it as content for her real estate brand to boost engagement, position herself as someone who championed small businesses, while still making every story orbit around her. It wasn't a surprise that she was here, not really. What surprised me was the sheer audacity of it, the way she assumed the spotlight was hers to manage, the story hers to frame. She gestured for the cameraman to start filming, and I, always the dutiful sister in public, gave him a nod. Claire began her introduction, speaking in that polished marketing tone that sounded professional on the surface, but carried a hollowness underneath if you listened closely enough. Today we're featuring Jenna Rose, owner of the charming and wildly successful Jenna's Nest right here in town. She's not just selling candles, she's creating a whole vibe, a sense of place. Jenna, how does it feel to be doing what you love? I could have answered with something benign, something polished and neutral, but instead I looked at the lens, then at her, and said, "It feels honest. Like waking up from a long nap where everyone told you your dreams were silly." Claire blinked once, smiled, and kept going. She was good at this, good at glossing over anything inconvenient with a pivot and a compliment. But I wasn't playing along. When she asked about my inspiration, I spoke of loneliness, of the long nights packing candles with a toddler asleep in the next room, of the people who smiled when I shared my plans but never asked how they could help. When she mentioned community, I talked about the strangers who showed up, the unexpected kindness from people with no stake in my story. And when she asked what it meant to have my family's support, I tilted my head slightly and said, "Interesting choice of words. Especially considering what happened on opening day." Her smile flickered, just slightly, like a light bulb exposed to a surge. "Oh, I thought you postponed. Wasn't that the message?" she said, her voice lifting at the end, as if confusion were the only emotion she could admit to. I looked directly at her then, held her gaze, and said, "Facebook said you were at your housewarming brunch." Her lips parted, but no sound came. The cameraman glanced up from his screen, clearly aware that something had cracked through the performance. She recovered quickly, complimented the candles again, asked the cameraman to get a few wide shots of the shelves, and began wrapping up the segment with the same glossed-over enthusiasm she had walked in with. But I saw it, the flicker of discomfort, the knowledge that she had miscalculated, that I wasn't going to pretend her lie had never happened. And it felt good, not in a vindictive way, but in a clear, liberating way, like finally saying what needed to be said, even if the person hearing it was already writing their own version of events. As they packed up to leave, Claire lingered by the door, hesitating for the first time since she'd arrived. "You've really built something here," she said quietly, without the camera, without the rehearsed voice. "It's impressive." I nodded, not with gratitude, but with acknowledgement, because I didn't need her validation anymore. She left without another word. That evening, after I closed up shop, I sat in the back room with a notebook in my lap and flipped back to the list I had made. I didn't cross her name out. She was still on it, still earned her place there. But now there was something else, an understanding, maybe, that these people would circle back, that they'd find ways to reinsert themselves, that they'd drape themselves in the glow of your work once it started to attract real light. But that didn't mean they had to be let in. Presence after the fact doesn't erase absence at the beginning. And as I scrolled through my store's growing number of online followers, saw the comments from people sharing the ribbon-cutting video, people who saw strength where my family had seen foolishness, I realized that I no longer wanted them back. Not even for the apology. Not even for the peace. Because there's a kind of freedom in knowing who you can't rely on and a power in turning that knowledge into momentum. Later that night, just before bed, I opened my inbox and saw an unexpected message. It was from Dave. No emojis. No links. Just a line that read, "You should probably know what really happened that day." And with that, the final thread of what I thought I understood began to unravel. There's a kind of numbness that sets in when you've spent days building walls around your anger, when the sting of betrayal has been so thoroughly absorbed by your bones that it becomes less of a pain and more of a hum. Something that follows you into your quietest moments, like the echo of a song you didn't ask to hear again. So when I opened Dave's message that night, 6 words typed plainly, without punctuation or warmth, I didn't immediately feel shock or dread or even curiosity, because part of me already knew that whatever he was about to say wouldn't change the way things were, wouldn't suddenly rewrite the silence of that morning or repaint the images I'd seen of my family laughing over Eggs Benedict while I stood alone with a pair of oversized scissors and a forced smile. But curiosity is a funny thing, and pain, when it's left unanswered, always comes back around like a debt that needs paying. I waited until the store was closed, until the last customer had wandered out and the streetlights had come on outside, casting that soft, flickering glow across the front windows, before I opened the second message he sent, this one longer. Written in full sentences, though still with that signature tone of his, like he wasn't sure if he should be apologizing or defending himself, so he landed somewhere vaguely in the middle. He wrote that he hadn't meant to skip the opening, that he'd woken up that morning fully intending to come, that the balloons were already in the trunk of his car, that he even had a card for me, a Hallmark one, he admitted, which made me laugh, bitterly. Because of course Dave would go with something mass-produced instead of writing something real. But then, he said, he got a call from Claire around 9:15, just as he was leaving the house, and she told him the event had been postponed due to last-minute supplier issues that I was too embarrassed to make it public, and that it would be better to keep it quiet for Jenna's sake. He said he didn't question it, not because he didn't care, but because, in his words, Claire had always been the one who ran things in the family, and he assumed she was just managing some damage control on my behalf. The way she always used to step in and take over when things got messy. He admitted it was a mistake. He said he should have called me directly, should have driven to the store anyway, should have known that postponement wasn't something I'd do without telling him myself. But he didn't. He believed her. And then he did nothing. I sat there in the back room for a long time after reading it, the hum of the mini fridge cutting through the silence, my thoughts tumbling over each other in that chaotic, familiar way that always precedes the moment when you finally, truly let go of something. I thought about every single time Claire had spoken for me in rooms I hadn't been invited to, every holiday she organized that happened to leave me out of the group text, every subtle edit she made to our shared history when talking to new people, like rewriting the script so that she was the sister who held it all together while I was the wild card, the dreamer, the one who could never quite get it right. It wasn't just that she'd lied. It was that she'd made the decision for everyone else about whether or not I deserved to be supported. She had pulled the strings, gently, quietly, with that practiced grace she always used, so no one would notice they were being led. And they followed, because that's what they'd always done. I could have screamed. I could have called her, demanded an explanation, thrown her words back at her like broken glass, sharp and dangerous. But instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up the original ribbon-cutting video, the one Miles had filmed with such quiet reverence, the one that caught not just the awkward snip of the ribbon, but the flicker of realization that passed across my face when I turned to an empty sidewalk. I watched it again, not to punish myself, but to remind myself what truth looks like when it's captured without filter or rehearsal. Then I uploaded it to every platform I had: Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn, and I captioned it with a line that had been sitting in the back of my mind like a match waiting for a spark. When they try to erase you, make sure you're the one holding the pen. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't explain. I didn't follow it up with stories or clarification or finger-pointing. I just let the video speak for itself, and it did. Within 24 hours, the post had been shared hundreds of times, mostly by women I'd never met, business owners, teachers, moms, people who'd opened things alone and understood what it meant to build something with your bare hands, while the people you loved watched from a distance, arms folded. I got messages from strangers saying thank you, telling me their stories, asking where they could buy the candle from the video. Orders came in faster than I could pack them. The scent in the clip, amber and clove, sold out in 3 hours. And then, late that evening, just as I was boxing up the last shipment, my phone rang again. Grandma Evelyn. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said I should. Her voice was softer than I expected, like the edges had worn down since the last time we spoke, and she didn't waste time with small talk. She said she saw the video, said she cried when she realized it had been real, that I'd really been standing there alone, while everyone else sipped mimosas and laughed. And then she told me something I hadn't expected. She said Claire had done it before years ago, kept her from attending a family event because she thought it would be too stressful for me to deal with Grandma's health issues. She had intercepted the invitation, told Grandma the wrong date. When the event came and went, and Grandma called confused, Claire told her I had changed the schedule and forgot to inform her. Grandma said she hadn't thought much of it at the time, chalked it up to chaos and poor communication. But now she wasn't so sure. I listened in silence, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because some truths land with such a thud that you have to sit with them before you know what to do. We talked a little longer, soft and hesitant, both aware that something had shifted. She apologized, not for believing Claire, but for not asking questions, for not showing up, for not seeing me clearly until now. After we hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there in the quiet glow of the store I built, surrounded by the scent of lavender and burnt sugar and pine. And I let myself feel the strange mix of sadness and triumph that comes when you finally understand that the people who were supposed to love you might never have known how. The next morning, I changed the tagline on the shop's homepage. It used to say, "Curated comfort for your home." Now it said, "Built on broken promises. Burned into something better." Because I started this store thinking I was selling candles, and maybe I still am, but what I really lit that day, standing there with my golden scissors and that red ribbon fluttering in the breeze, was the fuse to a truth I had tried for far too long to snuff out with politeness. And the truth is, once the match is lit, you don't beg anyone to watch it burn. You let them find the fire on their own.